Hello, HTTP, Dorissa Griffin here, and I am beyond excited for your inaugural Digital Inclusion Summit. Alejandro, I know you and your team have worked tirelessly to bring together an outstanding and engaging virtual event that will help to move the dial forward on inclusion for diverse communities. So on behalf of your partners at MMTC, congratulations and keep up the amazing advocacy.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Alejandro, for inviting me to say a few words today, virtually, of course, at your Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnerships Digital Inclusion Summit. That's a lot of words. Your work as Executive Director of the HTTP, okay, a lot easier, bringing together an amazing coalition of 17 of the country's leading Hispanic nonprofit organizations to promote digital equity is so critical right now. We sure know it in the middle of this pandemic. And your efforts help support more than 50 million Hispanic Latino Americans access education, economic, and healthcare opportunities with the technology tools and the resources they need. HTTP's leadership has never been more important as we face this public health and economic crisis, especially because we know that this virus is disproportionately impacting the Latino community. And as many schools have transitioned to online learning, we've got first graders learning the mute button, and businesses have sadly closed, students and families are relying on the internet to learn and work from home, search for jobs, and access telehealth services. Yet a study found that only 61% of Latino households have broadband at home. Sometimes it's not having the equipment, but a lot of times it's not having high-speed access. That is simply unacceptable. That's why this summer I introduced the Accessible, Affordable Internet for All Act, which will greatly expand access to affordable high-speed internet for everyone. My bill, which is led by Jim Clyburn over in the House, includes a $100 billion investment for high-speed broadband infrastructure nationwide and would ensure that internet service is affordable by providing a $50 monthly discount on internet plans for low-income consumers. It also includes $685 million to establish grant programs for states to close gaps in broadband adoption and help ensure people in every community have the tools, support, and technology they need to take advantage of internet access by investing in digital inclusion projects. In 2020, we should be able to connect every single family to high-speed internet, regardless of their zip code. It shouldn't be one family gets to learn with the internet and the other has to do it over the phone or by paper and pencil. And while our use of the internet expands as we work to ensure every family is connected, we must also make sure we take steps to protect our personal data. And I did want to add something on this. In December, I introduced the Consumer Online Privacy Rights Act along with Senators Cantwell, Schatz, and Markey to establish digital rules of the road to put consumers in control of their private information and hold big tech companies accountable. I also lead a bipartisan bill with Senator Kennedy, who's a Republican from Louisiana, and that would give consumers the right to access and control how their personal data is being used and require companies to establish and maintain a privacy security program. Our bill also includes provisions to prohibit personal data from being used to discriminate in housing, education, and employment decisions, including decisions based on algorithms. It's time for Congress to do its job and pass comprehensive privacy legislation, and I know that with your help, working together, we can get it done and accomplish some remarkable things. Thank you for your hard work and continuing to make your voices heard. Yours is a growing, strong community, especially in our business world. I'm pretty excited for what's to come next year. Let's get this done. We need you now more than ever. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ramiro Cavazos. I'm the president and CEO of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We were founded in 1979 in Santa Fe, New Mexico by 5 small business owners, men and women who wanted to fight and make sure that Latino businesses were at the decision-making tables, corporate America, government, and of course, day-to-day business and commerce. We're very proud that we represent a board of directors. Our chairwoman is Alice Rodriguez, and we are led by our chambers. We have 260 Hispanic chambers in our nationwide network, from Seattle to Puerto Rico, Rhode Island to Honolulu, Wisconsin, Minnesota, all the way to the Magic Valley of South Texas. Our staff works very, very hard on behalf of those chambers, but our 4.7 million Hispanic-owned businesses. We have 61 million Latinos in America. 1 out of every 6 of us is self-identified as Latino, and we cross all currents, and our strength is our diversity and the love that we have for this nation and our culture and for one another. We're Caucasian, we're Asian, we're Afro-Latinos, we're rich, poor, we're Jewish, Muslim, Protestant, and Christian, all walks of life, all industries. And we work very hard to make sure that we have the infrastructure that we need. And now, with technology being the new economy, we're very proud to stand with HTTP, the Hispanic Technology and Telecommunications Partnership, all of its members and affiliates, each of you that's tuning in, and these great panel members that are going to be speaking to you today that are experts in their field. It's very important that we continue to build on our programs that we provide nationwide through our chambers to build capacity with small business owners through our Avanzar program. We also have initiatives where we provide chamber grants to our chambers to give them the resources that they need. And we work very hard at procurement, building contracting opportunities with Fortune 1000 firms, getting more Latinos and Latinas on corporate boards, and ensuring that our tax dollars, that the U.S. government, the largest buying service in the world, also buys goods and services from our Latino-owned businesses. So we're very proud of our procurement programs, our capacity building programs, and programs to enrich our chambers. We will continue to do our work, working with Alejandro, Roark, with the HTTP as the executive director. Thank you, Alejandro, for the powerful work you do and the board of directors that you represent. This is a great panel today. We'll continue to do our part at the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, representing the future economy. And the best days are ahead for us because we are the engine of America's economic future. So we encourage you to learn as much as you can about the need for more infrastructure and broadband and technology. And we're very proud to be members of HTTP, and the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce will continue to be your ally and your partner. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, Alejandro, for the work that you do.
Thank you, Ramiro. Achieving the goal of full digital inclusion and universal broadband adoption, both today in the wake of COVID-19 and into the future, will take a collaborative and integrated approach with policymakers, private industry, and in partnership with local communities. Across the United States, internet service providers have spent billions of dollars building out our telecommunications infrastructure and billions more each year to maintain those networks. And they play an important role in us understanding where current coverage gaps currently are and in sparking collective action at all levels to reimagine how we meet our country's connectivity needs today. To understand how telecommunications service providers are thinking through these dynamic problems, I sat down with Jonathan Spalter, CEO of USTelecom, the Broadband Association, Shirley Bloomfield, CEO of the Rural Broadband Association, Michael Powell, CEO of NCTA, the Internet and Television Association, and Meredith Baker, CEO of CTIA, the Wireless Association. Here are the highlights from those conversations as we discussed what actions Congress, regulators, and broadband providers and digital inclusion advocates like us can take to deliver real solutions for historically disconnected communities across the country.
Our mission is very clear. We're all about trying to create opportunities and incentives for our nation's broadband providers to work in partnership with government and the broader technology ecosystem to deliver the promise that broadband technology we know, specifically in this time of challenge, this national health emergency that we're navigating, can bring to us all. Broadband is the connective tissue that binds our country's opportunities, our economy, in our social life together in ways that we could not even have imagined even just 5 years ago. The billions of dollars of investment that our broadband providers are making in our nation's infrastructure have gone a long way to including more of our fellow citizens, our neighbors, our families, our enterprises in the opportunities of our economy. We have a long way to go to ensure that we can connect everybody to the potential that connectivity can bring, to make sure that that connectivity is accessible and that its tools are also able to be used by every part of our society. On a personal level, I got to say this too. I don't think any one of us is not touched by how broadband-enabled technology can bring hope, opportunity, inclusion, and access to even life-saving tools. Many of us have parents and grandparents that now can use these devices that we're using for improving their well-being, improving their health, public safety, our kids learning through these networks that we're so proud to build and to deploy. This all came very close to home for me about 9 years ago when one of my children was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. She was lucky to get into a clinical trial at Stanford University's Children's Hospital. And her care team wasn't just nurses and doctors, they were network engineers and coders writing algorithms. Broadband has become an essential feature for my daughter's ability to lead a healthy, connected life where she can interact with the cloud, with her endocrinologists that can autonomously regulate her insulin levels. And as a result, broadband is the best chance that my daughter and hundreds of thousands of other children and adults across our country have to actually being able to lead healthy lives. We need to focus on creating sound policies and pathways that will enable more broadband access, broadband affordability, and universal connectivity. So it's not just about playing games and having this type of communication. These technologies are delivering real life solutions for our communities, for our families, our parents, and our children. And I know that personally. I get to work with companies and our members at USTelecom who are in the business of creating opportunities and are trying to do everything they can to connect communities everywhere, no matter what, no matter where. But we all know that the adoption rate of some of our digital tools, access to some of our digital infrastructure is lower in minority and low-income communities. And this is attributed to, I think, embedded structural and even systemic reasons. Affordability, digital literacy, lack of access to computers and to networks have been driving this challenge. And the numbers, are sobering. We know that 34% of Black adults, 39% of Latino adults, and fully 47%, almost half of those who are living on tribal lands don't have home broadband connections. Now, those are numbers that need to be solved. There are very specific steps that are realizable, that are right in front of us, that we need to get over the finish line right away. And it starts with things that might be considered by some as mundane, but are so critical, including we need to actually fund broadband maps, the next generation of broadband maps that will allow us to more accurately and more quickly and with more cost efficiency deliver the scarce broadband dollars that are through the broadband programs that our government provides to where they're needed most. We believe that we can take positive and practical steps to really think through how we can modernize and reinvent and make more purposeful and more efficient programs like Lifeline and E-Rate and other mechanisms that exist to address our low-income communities, our schools, our anchor institutions, connect those who have not yet been able to get the right level of broadband connection in our higher cost, more rural communities. We can take positive steps to create a more digitally inclusive future?
My folks are the rural of the rural. They are in the places of the country where the large carriers, when they started off telephone service many, many years ago, chose not to build networks out to. And they chose not to build into those areas because they're very rural and they're high cost and they may be geographically challenging. So my folks actually were born out of necessity to ensure that those communities at that point had telephone service. We find on average, for example, that my company serve about 7 consumers per mile of wire. Here in the Washington, D.C. area where I work, we've got, the estimates range from 1,000 to 2,000, depending on how many apartment buildings you're including in that mile. And when you think about it, that infrastructure is exactly the same. The software, the hardware, the fiber optics, the difference is the number of customers you have to spread that cost among, which is why it is so much more challenging and so much more expensive to actually build into these rural communities. We've now seen the evolution of going from telephone service to broadband connectivity. And that has been an exciting evolution. I will say, the first challenges that we had with broadband deployment were getting rural consumers to actually understand the applications. When we first started rolling out, there were a lot of people who were like, oh, what do I need faster emails for? But understanding what that broadband piece can bring in terms of again, things that we didn't even know before the pandemic. But, you're in a rural community and you may have 2 kids who are capable of or able to take advanced math. How do you pull those resources? How do we pull resources that we have at our fingertips in an urban area into these rural communities and really make a difference? And the thing that I love about the carriers that I represent, as I mentioned, 45 states, they cover about 38% of the landmass. So again, think about those areas when you're in an airplane and you look down and you're like, wow, there's just a lot of land out there. That's where my folks have infrastructure. But the thing I love is they're community-based. They live and they work in these communities. Their success is tied to the success of the towns that they live in. So if they are not going to provide the solutions, whether it's broadband, voice service, mobile service in a lot of cases, and certainly video services, there's nobody else who's going to come out there and do it. Their kids go to those schools. Their neighbors work in some of those local companies and on Main Street. So the feel of what they do and the passion behind it is so genuine and so day-to-day for them that it's really been fun, and it's honestly been a pleasure and an honor to work for them. That there's a whole part of rural America that's been left behind, and we have a lot of work to do as a country to connect those people. Right now, there's a lot of efforts out there to do that. There's a lot of initiatives. There's a lot of talk by policymakers, hopefully some programs getting stood up. But we've got people today who don't have connections. We've got kids today who are going to Taco Bell parking lots to do their homework. This is the United States of America. We've got to make sure that everybody has the opportunity and has access to the same opportunities. And we can't do that in a digital economy without making sure that broadband connections are there. So that is one piece of it. The other pieces I would say is there's an affordability factor. One of the things that has been really important for my providers is access to government programs, because that's what makes broadband affordable. One of the things that I loved about working on the 96 Telecommunications Act was there is a very important provision in there that codified that all Americans should have comparable and affordable services. I live to that creed where we need to make sure that folks, regardless of their income level, have the capability to access. I think the other thing that's important, just being very frank, is there is a limited amount of government support. You've got the FCC with universal service and RDOF. You've also got USDA that for rural markets has been extraordinarily key as a banker to actually give loans and grants and loan grant combinations through not only the traditional broadband program, but through the new Reconnect program that Congress authorized about 1.5 years ago. That to date, by the end of the year, will put $1.2 billion into the ground, again, in unserved and in underserved parts of the country. Because those resources are so valuable, we've got to make sure that policymakers make the best use of it. don't put these two programs in the same area to compete against each other. Don't let federal dollars compete against federal dollars for overbuilding when we've got so many people who don't have connections to begin with. So I know a lot of people like to default to competition's great. It'll bring the best services and prices. Yeah, that's a great concept. And that works here in Washington, D.C. If you are struggling to make a business case to put broadband in the first place in a rural, high-cost market, you know what? Competition not only doesn't work, it cannibalizes what you're trying to do, and it means there are fewer rural Americans that we'll be able to reach. You know what we don't do? We don't have the critical conversations. And I will say bringing these things closer to local communities is really where I see the magic happening, even if you bring it down to a state level. So while I think the federal government is really important in terms of resources, funding, some coordination, the areas that I have seen make the most progress on digital inclusion, capturing all communities within their area, are some of the states that have actually created broadband task forces. This is a way to get people who are boots closer to the ground, convening the right people for these discussions, whether it is diverse communities, whether it is rural citizens, whether it is those who are low-income individuals. When I see them sitting around the table at a state level, talking with superintendents of schools, talking about local health with local health providers, those are the conversations that need to take place. And the other thing I think that is key there, states, and I will throw out the state of Minnesota, for example, has a border-to-border program. They are exemplary. They make sure that every community has a voice at that table. And then they look at a map and they map out where's broadband not, what is the affordability factor, and then say, what can we do as a state to plug these gaps and figure it out? When it comes to, whoops, we're finding out in September, kids aren't going to be able to go back to school. What the role the state has been able to play to say, all right, which school children aren't connected? And if it's affordability, how do we work with the providers to connect them at their home? And how do we make it affordable for those families during this crisis time?
Broadband deployment has probably been the fastest deploying technology in the history of the world. And so we have much to celebrate in terms of how many people we reached and how quickly. But is always true with network infrastructure because of the economics, it gets really hard when you get to that last portion of the population. That was true with electricity. That's true with indoor plumbing and water. It's true with roads. It's true with almost every network infrastructure. I think it's smart to realize there's two kind of distinct problems caught up in the terms of digital divide, digital inclusion. We like to say digital equity. The first is people who don't even have the infrastructure to begin with. They are unserved. The network's yet to reach them. This is essentially a network economic problem of enormous proportions. Put simply, if I got to run a wire between two homes that are 300 miles apart to pick up two customers paying $50 a month, that is a heinous economic equation that's just insurmountable by most economic and financial models. So to reach the unserved it necessitates the power of the government being a partner with private sector in how to close that gap, because we're talking about there's only two ways to solve that problem, which are find more revenue, find more money to offset the enormous expense of reaching those people, or lower the costs. And you can lower the costs through technology, you can lower the costs through lower regulatory barriers, you can lower the costs other ways. But the big issue in this case is the sort of scary sums of money that would be required to get to 100%. The second problem is also encompassed in your concerns, but they're distinct. They're what I would call the adoption and affordability issues. Communities that have the infrastructure available to them, but nonetheless don't subscribe. We've been looking at that problem for 2 decades, and it is more complex than the first. It is littered with a myriad of explanations. One is we're surprised, no matter how different we think about it, how many people say they don't value the service enough to purchase it. Whether that's true in an exercise of free choice, or whether it's also because they don't fully appreciate the essentiality of it to being full participants in society. The other aspect of it is affordability. Even though I think the rates are generally pretty good, they're expensive for some people. and some families. And that particularly affects urban poor, where we find a lot of communities of color. It affects low-income families. It affects large families who have limited disposable income. But also, to get on the internet means you have to have the equipment. You have to have devices. You have to have a laptop. You have to have an iPad. You have to have a Wi-Fi router. You have to have a modem. It's not a simple, one device solution. So, we have that part of the problem. And then finally, I think the most underappreciated problem is the skills required to be effective. I remember in the early days of the internet, opening up a web browser and staring at the page and not really having the slightest idea what to do, where to go, what to experience. I think we take for granted that this thing is a pretty passive medium if you don't know what you're doing. It'll just stare at you. And I think we have to be committed to helping people develop the skills and the education necessary to take full advantage of these services. So all the programs that we're involved in, both on our own and in partnership with the government or other community organizations, is around these two buckets. On the unserved, it's really a question of stronger government partnerships and greater flow of consistent capital. This is where Congress could do more. This is where the FCC does a lot, but it's far short of the numbers that would seriously take us to the next level. Adoption and affordability, I think, one, there's an education effort around value, but on the affordability side, I think it's incumbent for the country to think about how do you provide low-income access affordability programs. Our industry is proud of what we do in this regard. Almost all of our companies have a low-income program, on average offering broadband around $9.95, $10 a month. But the government has programs as well. And I think one of the things this country's never quite grappled with is broadband going to be part of the social safety net? The way that we provide unemployment insurance or SNAP or the ability for people to feed each other, if we believe that this is an essential service, are we going to find a way to include some sort of support for those who are down on their luck or out of work or are struggling with the expenses associated with the service? I'm proud of my industry that we might have passed the social test too. I remember turning to the CEOs of our industry and I said, this has to be our finest hour. Our country is really in need here, and we need to find ways to step up. And right from the beginning, when Chairman Pai called on the industry to keep America connected, we were immediately there. And in fact, the cable industry took a lead position in arguing that that pledge should continue throughout the school year, so we could get our kids to the summer break effectively. But we kept people on the network. We didn't disconnect people. That was an important commitment. More importantly, I think we expanded our low-income access programs. We gave consumers free service for 60 days. Many of our companies, we increased speeds, we increased eligibility. We have Wi-Fi hotspots all over the United States. The industry opened up those Wi-Fi spots for free to all consumers, all citizens, all users. And the area we're focused most heavily on now is schools. We announced a big initiative called Bridge to Broadband in partnership with Education Superhighway to create a discounted offering that schools could purchase on behalf of all their unserved students, so the students themselves would have little to no expense associated with going to school remotely. Companies like Comcast have done lift zones where they're putting industrial grade Wi-Fi inside boys and girls clubs and community centers for people. Many of our companies have extended free periods of use, and many have made big financial commitments. Cox recently announced a $60 million commitment to helping schools and students learn remotely. So these are some of the things we've done. I think we're proud of how we've performed so far in COVID, but I think we're also very sober that we don't think COVID's going away tomorrow, and that we're constantly looking for better ways to help the country with one of its greatest challenges we've ever experienced. We've also really doubled down on the idea that we have to be part of the community. We have to be in the community. I think the schools thing has really led us to be present, to be, in communion with superintendents, with community activists, with local leaders, with groups like yours to try to better understand the problems and create more wraparound services to help. If I were to sum it up, I've often said this as a Black American myself. I think the promise of there's sort of been three great revolutions in the history of mankind. agricultural age, the industrial age, and now the information age. I think the information age is the first and only real opportunity a lot of people, particularly people of color, have had any opportunity to enjoy the fruits of that advance. You know, my relatives were picking cotton in the agricultural era. You know, my ancestors were living in legally segregated societies during the majority of the industrial era. This is the first era that may hold genuine promise for us. And I think there really is no future that you can see that isn't rooted in technology. And I think to be a full participant in that future, we got to overcome a lot of barriers in our communities: education, poverty and wealth disparities, access. You know, and in our world, in cable, you know, we're working to provide the essential tools that folks need to get in the game. But how well they play in that game is going to depend on attacking the chronic problems that stem from a history of racial and gender inequality. You know, in a way, just because you're handed a baseball bat doesn't mean, you know, you're prepared to be a good hitter in the major leagues. And so I want our society to see this as a big, comprehensive problem, part of the systematic racism work, part of the growing inequality work, so that we can create a community of people that not only have the tools, but have the skills, the coaching, the training that's necessary to actually succeed and perform well. And if we do that, it's a pretty exciting future for all of our citizens. If we don't do that, we're going to further exacerbate dramatically the inequalities that continue to plague American society. I think creating a spirit of partnership rather than adversarial environment, this is not a solution anybody's going to fix by yelling at anybody. We have to get all the providers in the game. You know, in our industry, we continue to be super frustrated by the legacy of telephone regulation and the fact that as we try to tackle broadband, so many of these programs have requirements and qualifications that keep people off the field. You know, the cable industry really wants to get deeper into the game of reaching people, but, you know, sometimes we find out that in order to get this money for this program, you have to be an eligible telecom carrier. You have to be something that's a vestige of old regulations that's just prohibitive. So we need Congress to remove barriers like that. The last two things I'd say, Alejandro, is we need to involve big tech more. The telecom companies and the broadband companies are central to this. But you know what? There's another class of providers who've profited massively from the internet tech revolution, who are in the schools, who provide and sell devices, who are an enormously wealthy component of the problem, who have to be part of the solution. I'd like to see us find more creative ways to get big tech on the team for solving this and sharing in the burden and the expense of how to fix it. Then finally, as I think I alluded to in my earlier comments, we need people like you. This needs a community collective action support system. You know, if there's a low-income family or Hispanic family or Latinx family living in Brooklyn somewhere, and we get them the service and we get them a device, if we just walk away from them and there isn't a community infrastructure that will help with education, skills, tech support, all kinds of other things, then we're sort of kidding ourselves we're making the world better for them. We're just sort of handing them a car sometimes that they don't fully know how to drive.
Broadband has never been more important or more relevant to our national dialogue. Well over half of Hispanic Americans report broadband being more important to their lives today. Mine too. The pandemic has showcased that access to broadband is critical. Industry, community groups, and policymakers must work together to ensure all Americans are connected. HTTP has been a powerful ally and voice in this fight. The wireless industry is committed to the task as well. I know this because of what I have seen over the past 6 months. Like many of you, I went home on March 13th. We closed CTIA for 2 weeks. 2 weeks! Fast forward a lot more than that, and our lives have fundamentally changed. One constant? Our smartphones. Now, more than ever, our smartphone is our lifeline, keeping us connected with family, work, school, and even our doctors. I'm proud we were ready when America needed us. As you have powerfully pointed out, the digital divide has never been more stark. COVID has magnified the divide in opportunities between those connected and unconnected. As a nation, we must do more to address affordability, access, and other adoption challenges. There is no silver bullet. We need to work together to solve rural and urban coverage, to ensure government programs address affordability, and to solve the digital literacy and device access challenges we have today. I've been blown away by the response of the wireless industry trying to meet the needs of kids. In the spring, our operators jumped into action. A wireless hotspot has proven to be the fastest and most effective way to get kids online. Verizon partnered with the LA Unified School District and, in the words of the state's superintendent, helped close the digital divide in the country's second largest school district. AT&T provides 60 days of free service for qualifying schools and recently delivered 11,000 hotspots in San Jose alone. Most recently, T-Mobile announced its 10 million project, which will provide free service and a free device to 10 million eligible households. All remarkable. But the commitment didn't end there. We helped feed hungry kids, and we invested in new curriculum and resources. Each day, a new problem revealed itself, and the U.S. wireless industry was ready to do its part to help. At CTIA, we created the Connected Kids Initiative to link school districts with providers in their community ready to help. Our collective efforts have provided new connectivity for over 2 million kids across the country. They are online right now because of the proactive efforts of the U.S. wireless industry. Wireless solutions have become the go-to answer for school leaders seeking an easy-to-use option for families. We have proven crucial to the most at-risk kids, as wired solutions can be a poor fit for students without a permanent home. Chicago identified the pressing need for wireless solutions to help 12,000 homeless kids keep learning this fall. Reach out to see if CARES funding is available to help bridge the gap. Use the Connected Kids portal to seek help. The same collaborative approach applies equally to all of our nation's digital divide challenges. We must be practical and resourceful. We must be partners. We can't let another year pass without reducing the number of Americans without connectivity. And this goes beyond a pandemic. All Americans need to benefit from the 5G economy we are building right now. It is critical to our nation's recovery.
I will go forward for my land and my legacy. Onward, forward, creating our destiny. Our past made history. I feel it in my soul and in my memory. My community lifts me higher, and I will go forward together with them.
You have the power to inspire the world. We connect you to everything that helps you move forward.